And we are live on Facebook. Our New Jersey Constitution Republicans virtual conversation. Really, this is a home run day. We had Assemblyman McClellan on. We just got done with State Senator Michael Testa. And now we have someone who the Constitutional Republicans revere, former Assemblyman, Mr. Michael Patrick Carroll. Thank you for joining me.
It's a wonderful opportunity.
And of course, we miss your days in the assembly, Assemblyman, but
Well, I don't.
we're certainly getting. Yeah, you picked probably the best time to end your career in the assembly was prior to the COVID nonsense. But
Well, actually,
it's good that
COVID's an inconvenience compared to leftism.
right. And the reason that we think so highly of you, Assemblyman, is because of all the posts that you'll put out, and I'll put up your Facebook page in a moment to give us to give all the different. You'll give commentary prior to posting articles, and all with great intellectual capacity. And that's what we need as Republicans. We need to be thinking. We need to be implementing logic, reason in what we do, especially in legislating and in governance. And so it's great to have you on. I value your opinion on many issues, but I'd like to start, if you could, Assemblyman, describe for our audience the process that occurs once you begin a session as an Assemblyman. Of course, you spend many, many years in the Assembly and have a tremendous amount of experience, but describe for our audience the rules that are made by the Assembly and by the Senate, and the form by which those rules are made and what happens afterwards, if you will.
Well, sure. I mean, every body, from the local Rotary on up, has a set of bylaws pursuant to which it operates, and rules are the rules governing debate, the rules governing voting, and things along those lines. Every 2 years in the legislature, certainly in the Assembly, I assume it's in the Senate as well, although they have a 4-year term. Every 2 years, one of the very first actions we take as a body was to adopt a set of rules governing how we will run the House, run the office, and how you vote, what rules are in place, how long you have to spend time between a bill going to a committee, et cetera, and so forth. And they're helpful, but they're not really all that important in the sense because there's one legislature can't bind another. So if we adopt a set of rules on the 1st of January and then find them inconvenient on the 3rd of January, we just simply ignore them. And routinely, the Democrats would start every assembly session with a motion to waive such part of the rules as stand in the way of doing whatever it is they feel like doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. And of course, the founders set up the legislative bodies as we're guided by our state or by our federal constitution. And Madison's view would be the need for deliberation, the need for taking your time, using reason, arguing, debating. Do you think that has been eliminated from the legislative process, the time that you have to be able to get your thoughts across and to have them debated back and forth between members? Do you think that's been eliminated now in the State House in Trenton?
I don't know if it was ever really there. I mean, the fact is that the way, as you know, the way the process works is that there's only one person who sets the agenda for the assembly, and that's the speaker. If the speaker doesn't like a particular bill, the speaker isn't going anywhere. And the speaker only posts bills that he or she knows will have sufficient votes on his or her side of the aisle to pass. And I was at an event last night where Assemblyman Bramnick was going on at some length about just how smart I was and articulate I was, and how everybody on the floor liked to listen to me talk. It's the old joke about that. That's the kind of introduction my father would think was interesting and my mother would believe. And so I would get up and talk now and again, and I think that my colleagues gave me their attention, but I never talked anybody out of a vote. When you come onto the floor, you know what you're going to do. Even when you go to committee, you know what you're going to do. And the problem I had is people would do it even when the facts upon which they were basing their particular analysis proved to be wrong. They wouldn't change their minds. I had a proposal up. I don't know if I ever actually introduced it into a legislative format, but to amend the Constitution, it said that every other session each legislator would have the right to insist that one of his or her bills be put on the floor for discussion. So it would move from the speaker the discretion to squelch the bills of either people he doesn't like, the party doesn't like, or issues he doesn't like. He would have to post 40 bills or 80 bills every other session that that individual members wanted to see posted. And the benefit, of course, is that you couldn't just simply freeze out somebody because and their district because they're in the minority party or they're not playing kissy face with the right political operators. It would have been great. I think we would have had some actual, honest to God, discussion. And you might not win anything, but at least you would force the majority in that situation to take up bills that are important to the minority and let them vote them down. But I think you should have, I think there should be some discretion or there should be some requirement that the individual legislators have their right to be heard, the right to govern what's going to be heard.
Right. And of course, what goes on, this occurs in the federal Congress as well as in our state houses.
Of course.
But the whole idea that Madison was talking about was the Aristotelian idea of discussing the good. What is truly the good? Why is this law necessary? What is good about this law? And I never knew that you would propose that, but that was brilliant. It goes right back to what Madison's idea is. So it's fair to say, in your estimation, that the Assembly Speaker, the House leader, and the state Senate president have entirely too much power in the legislative process. Is that true?
I think so. No one it's nowhere written in the Constitution anywhere that one person can stop a bill like that. Or they're not even assumed. It's just a matter of party discipline. And, there's a lot of reforms we could play with. My former colleague, the esteemed Richard Merck, once put in a proposal to eliminate the party line from in his situation in both general and primary elections. It's not a bad thought, but he should have gone further. What they should have done is eliminate any message of party on the general election ballot. And that way, people just simply can't go in and say, I'm going to vote for the Democrat. Now they actually have to do the homework and find out which one the Democrat actually is. And, I'm convinced that people like to talk about great vote turnout. Such a high vote turnout amongst people who are uninformed is not a good thing. You don't want people going to the polls, sticking pins into the ballots. Oh, that one, or I like that name, or what have you.
Right.
You want people to cast informed ballots and force something about the candidates by removing that party designation from the ballot. Just simply say, here are the people running for assembly. Vote accordingly. You got 2 votes. Great. But the government doesn't have to help them by providing them with extraneous information. Let them go do their homework themselves.
Exactly. An informed electorate is so important. But wouldn't you also say, Assemblyman, that, we revere George Washington's farewell, and largely that farewell revolved around avoiding faction, avoiding the party system that now has become so indicative of the polarization that exists. And that if you're a Republican, you got to go along with what the leader says, which is what we're talking about. If you're a Democrat, the same thing. And we've really essentially caused this great divide. And of course, the founders thought that everyone would be Republican in understanding the importance of representative government. Now we talk about democracy all the time, which the founders went to great lengths to make sure we were not a pure democracy, a direct democracy, which progressivism, of course, is incorporated. But don't you think that what exactly Washington warned us about with party and faction has become obviously the norm, the standard by which government is conducting itself now?
I think to an extent. I don't think parties are as big a threat as tribes. And, that's the problem I have with progressivism. One of the problems I have with progressivism these days is A, it doesn't respect any limits on the size of government. B, it doesn't respect any limits on majority rule until such time as it loses an election. Then all of a sudden it's very much in favor of those limits. And C, it's tribalist to the extreme. And I think if you go back and read the Declaration of Independence, you read the Federalist Papers, you read the Constitution, you read the early history of the country, the one thing they were trying to avoid more than anything else wasn't so much faction, it was tribal. That they said, sunum, from the many one. whether you
Yes.
time. It's always funny to me because the modern identity politics crusaders, they use arbitrary concepts like white or black or Asian, which have no real world meaning. And it's
Mhm.
and they act as if
True.
so they'll look at me and say, well, you're a white guy. Well, not back then I wasn't. The Irish weren't considered that way. The Jews weren't considered that way. Eastern Europeans weren't considered that way. And the whole point was that the founding of this country was to foresee that we were going to be a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-background, not so much multicultural. We're going to have one, but and from that polyglot, as it were, group, concoct one people. And progressives don't like that. Progressives don't want us to be one people. They want us to be a lot of different peoples, each one judged on the basis of their skin color or their ethnicity, where their parents came from. And that's terrible. That's the most destructive thing I think we can possibly have. We might even survive socialism. We can deal with that by getting out of it at some point, as hard as it might be. Once you have killed off the nature or the essential notion that there is one American people, that's going to be very tough to get back.
Yeah, very astute. And also, Assemblyman, it reminds me of what Lincoln talked about with the electric cord that connected each generation with the ideas and principles personified in the Declaration of Independence, being the laws of nature, self-evident truth, all men are created equal, unalienable rights, among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the consent of the governed, those consenting to be governed as long as the government is securing their natural rights. And he talked about that cord that was going from one generation to another, and speaking in those days to the people, to the citizens who ancestors were maybe a generation or two away from actually coming from Europe at the time. But that electric cord now seems to have been broken. And that really is indicative of the real fundamental problem that we have, not only in the state, but in the nation. Would you agree?
To an extent, again, you have, I don't think it's hyperbole to say progressives don't much care for America. They don't like the founding. They don't like the people who founded it. They don't like the institutions. They don't like the concepts. If you're a racial essentialist and everything to you is about race, then the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence are your enemy, because they're four square. They're saying, and they might say, well, the country never lived up to it. To an extent, they're right. No one ever proclaimed that the United States was a perfect nation. It's the Constitution says we're going to be a more perfect union. Not that we started out that way. And so, I think that we have to look back and say to people like Jefferson, the first thing should be, well, he was a slaveholder. No, he was a great man. And his ideas, the kind of thing that broke those chains. He may not have intended it.
Right.
I think probably he did, although he was too weak personally to go along with that. But I mean, everything is always attacking the very fabric of what makes us to be an American. And this is Deweyism. This is exactly what they thought back when. This is progressivism, to eliminate your ties to other things and build them up around a different set of priorities and a set of loyalties. I don't know what more can be said. It's very difficult to listen to people excoriate the country on a daily basis while purporting. I think that, if I may segue there for 1 second, they're obviously wrong. I mean, people marching around claiming that we're somehow systemically racist when they can't identify any evidence to that effect. But then we look around the world and we find out that all sorts of millions of people of color are literally dying to come to this systemically racist country. Unless they're complete idiots, the fact of the matter is that someone is wrong. It's either the left or it's everybody else in the world. And I think the American left has an unbroken record of being wrong about the United States and its people.
No question about that. And you talk about the progressives so accurately, but what has also been conjoined with the progressives, we really live, and we talked to our great friend of NJCR, James Lindsay, about this, and that's the fact that we live in Herbert Marcuse's world. Of course, Herbert Marcuse was really the founder of the New Left, neo-Marxism in the 60s, and his ideas, his writings on repressive tolerance, on Eros and civilization, all of the different of the one-dimensional man, all of these ideas now we see embraced by the left and the so-called woke. And really what it becomes is, you're talking about identity politics, but really what it also could be described as is identity Marxism. And it's amazing that the progressive elements have conjoined with these neo-Marxists.
Well, it's actually interesting to me is that the left for public consumption is always out there. We need more, and you fill in the blank with the politically correct minority group. Until such time as one of those politically correct minority groups happens to be a Republican or a conservative, and then all of a sudden, let's say go back to the last gubernatorial election. Here you had people running for office. The Democrats saying, "Well, we need more women in office," but not if they're Republicans. They again, in California, we need more blacks in office, but not if they're Republicans. And the fact is that there's nothing progressives, especially white progressives, hate more than a conservative person of color. And they hate Thomas Sowell, they hate Clarence Thomas, they hated Ben Carson. It's because those people have the nerve to think for themselves and not consider their skin color or their ethnicity or their sexuality to be political statements.
Yeah, no question about it. You can add a great man like Booker T. Washington in there as well, and even Frederick Douglass. But it's very interesting to note too that with the constant bickering that the Democrats use, you have to follow this narrative. You have to believe in, really, it's the idea of the oppressor and the oppressor being taken on by this new proletariat. Marx, of course, believed that it was going to be the workers of the world. But now really the new proletariat is made up of all these different so-called minority groups, sexual designations, economic classes, and so forth. That's become the new proletariat. And it's from the institutions of higher learning that this has occurred. It's this academic elite that's been teaching the ideas of critical race theory and critical social justice. And of course, Phil Murphy is very, very motivated by this whole social justice agenda that many New Jerseyans, citizens, really don't understand the foundation by which Phil Murphy ideologically subscribes.
Well, I get a kick out of the fact that he's so liberal that he couldn't even get by in Massachusetts. He had to come to New Jersey. It's to me, I'm not my daughter is a lexicographer to an extent, I guess you call it that, or a linguist. And she's against what they call prescriptivism. That a word always has to mean what it means. But I think that words like social justice are oxymorons. It's like racial justice. You can't judge a race. It's not possible. And groups cannot be judged. Judgment is an individual concept. So when you talk about social justice, you're talking about an impossibility, because individuals can be judged, and they deserve to be accorded in accordance with their performance or their abilities or what have you, their actions. So looking out and saying racial equity, what does that even mean? That means you somehow judge people on their skin color, which of course is exactly what they mean. And that's, I come back to what I said before, a faction composed of tribal undertakings like that, whether it's black, whether it's Asian. I mean, I've always wondered about those particular breakdowns too. Does a person from Israel have the same sort of interest as someone from Japan or their ancestry? Those are both Asian countries. What about Hispanics? There are only 75 different Hispanic countries in the world, and it's actually funny history on Mexico and Mesoamerica, on the Aztecs, the Olmecs, and other groups down there, and it's fun to them talk about colonialism and such like that from the Spanish, as if the Aztecs weren't experts at it already. But what gets me going about it is that they consider they refer to the Spanish at that point as Europeans, which is interesting. Now we know they're Hispanic. They don't count as, quote, white, unquote. And it's a very arbitrary group of definitions that the left boxes us into.
No question about it. And what I wanted to discuss too with you, Assemblyman, was the constitutionality of the New Jersey Constitution in regards to the handling of the COVID-19 lockdowns. I wanted to ask you to begin with, do you think that Phil Murphy exploited, first of all, doesn't an executive order carry with it the force of law equal to what the legislative body creates in making law? Do you think they're similar or they're identical?
Well, again, as a lawyer, if you sat through class, you remember the old non-delegation doctrines and what a legislature could allow a governor to do. The statutes are admittedly very broad, So generally speaking, the answer to the question would be no. An executive order does not have the same effect as a statute because it only has the effect that the governor is by constitution entitled to give to that. But
Mhm.
when the statute says in effect, do whatever you feel like doing during a time of crisis, that presents an interesting question. I mean, because the legislature has clearly given the governor huge authority. Now, as a judge,
Mhm.
you have to wonder about that. How long does it go?
Mhm.
The restrictions on that, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that a cowed legislature, even in a state, could endow a governor with virtually dictatorial powers. And then let's say he took those powers and say started shutting down weddings, shutting down funerals, and shutting down parks and trails and public events.
Mhm.
That was pretty far beyond the pale. I mean, the thing always got me, of course, was that here you have Phil Murphy telling us we need 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and so don't go out, don't go to parks, don't go to beaches, don't go to boardwalks. But oh, by the way, I'm going to go march because apparently the bug will not pass at a BLM rally.
That's right. Exactly. Great point. We pointed that out as well. And don't you think, Assemblyman, that it's important that the legislative body distinguish and define what constitutes a health crisis or an emergency? Now, we have seen the progressives, starting with FDR in his inaugural speech, 1933 January, referring to the Great Depression as a war. And then we see him saying that if the Congress is not going to cooperate, that he is going to do what he thinks is necessary to wage war. And he did it through all of the different executive orders that led to, and were supported by the New Deal. But don't you think that it's important, Assemblyman, that the legislature clearly determine what constitutes a health crisis by which a governor is given expansive powers? Because we know during war, a declaration of war, the executive branch is given a great expansion of powers. Doesn't it appear to be an exploitation of that very idea, calling the COVID-19 a war?
FDR wasn't the first one to do it. The progressives have been at that from the beginning because they know that they may be deluded in a lot of ways, but they're not stupid. And they have seen over the course of many generations that people just simply do not behave the same way during normal times as they do during periods of crisis. They are willing to tolerate a lot more government. They're willing to tolerate a lot less freedom, pay higher taxes, and do things when there is an existential crisis that they're not willing to do otherwise. That's why they came up with the concept of meow, which is the moral equivalent of war. And that's kicked on since the 1870s, I want to say. I mean, it's been that long. So I'm not entirely certain that the definition of the crisis is what's important. I think the time limit is. I mean, it should basically say legislature, when the governor invokes an emergency, that the legislature has to act within, say, a month, and expressly and give the governor the authority that he claims he needs, and then do it on a regular basis. Because there's no reason for these continued extension, time after time after time after time, with one man determining for himself, without answering to anybody, what the governor's powers are during a time of crisis. And I think he should have gone. I think that we should amend the statutes, maybe even amend the Constitution, to prohibit these long-term states of emergency, so that, I mean, let's put it this way: if Phil Murphy went to the New Jersey legislature tomorrow and asked for power, in all likelihood he's going to get it. Because, I mean, even if it was a partisan problem at that point, there aren't enough Republicans down there to make a difference. So, but I think you started out this discussion with the Aristotelian idea of free, robust, and open debate. Okay, well, have it. Let's have a free, robust, and open debate on the floor of the New Jersey legislature to discuss whether or not these particular powers ought to go forward from today till next month, how long they should go for, what restraints we want to impose upon them. Because at the end of the day, remember, these are legislative powers he's adopting. And I think, I don't remember which one of the framers said that consolidating all the powers of government into one person is the very definition of a tyranny.
I think it may have been Jefferson who said that, but all points well taken. And of course, I was very alarmed by doing some research, Assemblyman, on the fact that only 32% of the registered electorate in the state voted for the governor in 2017. So we obviously have a terrible voter apathy problem. And what do you think that we as Republicans can do to get Republicans to vote en masse? I think 60% of Republicans voted for Guadagno in 17, but yet it was only 32% of the overall electorate that voted to begin with. So what the statistics showed that the independents moved over towards Murphy. Of course, there's 2.4 million independents, but what do you think we as Republicans have to do to energize our base? I mean, isn't the fact that constitutional rights of freedom of assembly or right of assembly, freedom of religious expression, the New Jersey Constitution gives the person the unalienable right to obtain, possess, and protect their property, which is their money, which is their business. And we saw 30% of the business. What do we have to do to awaken the people that we are losing our natural rights in New Jersey?
And you know, it's that you've asked basically, I'm just going to assume a rhetorical question because first of all, as we discussed before, mere voter turnout is not desirable. If you have no idea who the candidates are and what they stand for, stay home.
Great point. Great point.
You know, I'm not an advocate of broad-based voting in the absence of also broad-based knowledge, and an informed voter is actually doing harm because that's just a problem. As respects what we Republicans face, what my father used to call it, he said we were the eat your spinach party, and that's why we lose elections, because we are the people who are always telling you this is what's good for you, you have to do it. Whereas the Democrats are, here's a plate of candy, go for it. You know, Democrats aren't surprising. They win their elections the old-fashioned way. They buy them with the public treasury.
Yeah.
You vote for us, and we will give you lots of other people's money. And you know, you look at what Biden's doing down in DC. You know, 3.5 trillion. You know, that number is just incomprehensible. It's actually $8 trillion when you figure everything in. But no one has a clue what that means. But it works out to about $64,000 per family over the next 10 years. And for that, we get what? Well, we get all sorts of handouts, freebies, and giveaways, which they, you know, those rich people over there, those are the ones who are going to pay for them. It's going to go to the business. They're going to pay for it, not me. And that indicates that the American people are stupid, that they need, or at least the Democrats think they are, that that they would concede for an instant that you can spend trillions and trillions of dollars on handouts, freebies, and giveaways, and that the middle class, for example, isn't going to pay for them. And we Republicans have made errors over the years too. We made a big one here in New Jersey under Christy Whitman. I voted for it because it was better than nothing, I guess, at the time. We took a whole bunch of people off the tax rolls. That's a terrible idea. You know, the Democrats love to talking about paying your fair share. Your fair share of funding or helping fund the state of New Jersey is never zero, no matter how much you make. And so your income tax rate ought to be exactly the same from first dollar to 50 millionth dollar. It just doesn't matter because everybody should pay. And when we as the Republicans say to people, we're going to take you off the tax rolls, they say, great, now what incentive do I have to vote for you anymore? You know, it's you know, our ideas of freedom, individual rights, individual responsibilities are hard. You know, being free is hard. And perpetually scared about that you know, what's the line is, you know, I'm only one paycheck away. Well, everybody's always one paycheck away. You know, it's just the way it is. And you know, that's what a free people are. We have a word to describe people who are forever holding on to their nanny's shirt strings. That's children. Adults take care of themselves. That, however, is a difficult message to convey. You know, when Adams or Tom Jefferson or George Washington were talking about their personal freedoms, and people knew what they were talking about, and people were engaged on that level. Once it became a subject of the progressives sort of won the debate in the sense that now the government can provide all sorts of handouts, freebies, and giveaways. If the question is who can buy my vote at the highest price to the Treasury, we Republicans don't have a chance. We can never out irresponsible the Democrats.
Right.
So I guess.
And speaking,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going
to say. Go ahead.
Well, you hush for a minute. I was going to say the only way we can do that, I guess, is to play the games we've always played in the sense of saying, you know, we can't promise you anything except freedom. And if you think freedom can be bought, or if the Democrats can buy your freedom, there's nothing we can do about it. It's like, for example, you know, we Republicans are starting to do much better amongst many minority groups because we're going out there saying we don't care your skin color. And we are never, ever going to be able to win the votes of people who passionately care about skin color, no matter what color those people see. Because Republicans are not going to win the votes of people who are walking around there considering their skin color, whether that skin color is white or black or any other color. We're not going to win their votes because we don't give a damn.
Mhm.
And so that's a constituency we're always going to lose until they change their minds and become right.
Points well taken. And Assemblyman, we constantly talk about the need, as you're talking about voter, requiring the voter to be knowledgeable of the candidate and the purpose of government, which most people don't even understand what the purpose of government is. According to the Declaration, it's the securing of the person and their property, which is what the founders understood. And what we talk about all the time in the Constitutional Republican movement is that the voter needs to require any candidate, every candidate, regardless of whether it's local, state, federal, number one, constitutional literacy, number two, intellectual rigor, so that they're able to articulate, they understand the purpose of government, they can have a conversation with you or me about it. We shouldn't be the smartest people in the room, but the representatives are required to know the Constitution and to know, to be able to articulate that in an intellectual manner. So we talk about that all the time.
Well, I am the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of cats in here with me, so maybe I'm not. But anyway,
That's
wanted
true.
to
Well,
go back
you're not the most powerful person in the room anyway.
Rob, that's right. They do wield a lot of power.
I
I wanted to go
that.
back for a moment.
Go ahead.
No, I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back for a moment. If I wanted to ask you a question about the COVID-19 lockdown and the what was done as a result in suspending constitutional rights. But I've suggested, Assemblyman, that the state senator or the state senate president was not indeed the second most powerful person in the state over the last year. It's really been Commissioner Judith Percicelli, who is the commissioner of the State Department of Health. Of course, a Murphy appointee, and I had shown a video a little while ago where she said that the department had the responsibility of managing the COVID-19 emergency response. And I immediately thought that the legislature would be involved more with that than the department, but isn't she indicative of the progressive idea of elitists and those who are indoctrinated in progressivism and bureaucratic administrations like administrative agencies like the Department of Health having all too much autonomous power?
The whole administrative state has always been problematic, you know that, and it's the idea that we have these so-called experts who have been repeatedly, I mean, in New Jersey in COVID, they were not only wrong, they were spectacularly, murderously wrong. We had, unfortunately, here in New Jersey, Governor Murphy, confronted with the bug, panicked, and you can understand the panic after a fashion. I mean, it was less funny to listen to Andy Cuomo on panicking when Trump wanted to send him 400 ventilators. He said, "Well, 400, what's that? I need 30,000." He never needed 30,000, never close. Right. That was their panic. And they were scared stiff that their hospitals were going to be overwhelmed. So they sent the bug into nursing homes where it could be managed. Mm-hmm. That proved to be the single most deadly decision that anyone has made during the entire crisis. And it helps to explain why those 5 Democratic states were so grossly overrepresented amongst the death statistics. New Jersey's number 1 still, because Phil Murphy was a catastrophe on that. He didn't follow science, unquote. He just panicked. And as a result, you sent a bug which picked on old, frail people, which just loved to feast on them, to an environment which was filled with old, frail people. And
disaster.
And the thing about it that gets me is that to this day, the left has not, or the media, the left, to the extent there's a difference, has not held those Democratic governors responsible for their gross malpractice. It was just, I mean, if Trump had done anything like that, he would have been publicly hanged. You know, it's you have here's Phil Murphy. He's out there, you know, with his smile and gets credit for how he handled the crisis, despite the fact that his handling the crisis cost thousands of people their lives. And not only forgave that, it gave Cuomo an Emmy. You know, he lost because he was a sexual harasser, apparently, but you know, it's for killing thousands of people, they didn't care. And that still shows to be the power of the legacy media, that a catastrophic mistake, terrible governmental malpractice, is actually rewarded rather than punished.
And another example of Phil Murphy's lack of regard for the Constitution was requiring mail-in voting last year, when that responsibility is clearly given the legislature first, is it not?
Yeah, they went back and gave him a mulligan. They adopted that through. He realized he had a problem. They went back and adopted a statute later on. It's. But again, when you didn't he say something along the lines of the Bill of Rights is above my pay grade? So if your philosophy is the Constitution doesn't apply to you, or that if there's a court out there that wants to stand in your way, go ahead and let them sue me. That's. I mean, I remember even when Barack Obama at one point said, I don't have the right to do these things just simply because I want to do them. Then, of course, he decided he did have the right to do it, because who was going to stand in the way?
Right.
In a Republican form of government, I think you started out with this. You need virtuous people running it who to their own authority. And if you elect someone to office, and it's always ironic to me that progressives are all over what an authoritarian Trump hit was, while Joe Biden is out there, unilaterally issuing executive orders, while Obama governed with his ruled with his pen and his phone. We conservative Republicans, we constitutional Republicans, believe that even if a thing is good, governors just simply don't have the right to do it. You have to have that power, and absent that, you should not try to exercise if you don't believe you have it. What was Biden's line? This may be unconstitutional. I'm going to do it anyway. That's not how the government's supposed to work. That's
right. That's right. And what did Washington say? It's the document that I will never abandon. And he, of course, is our great example and provided the great example for all presidents, primarily up until FDR, I would say. But another thing,
got Wilson in there too. Remember that?
Oh, well, that's when it really started to become. He was the first political science major we had as a president. And of course, he was really the first progressive, being very much influenced by Frank Johnson Goodenow and Herbert Crowley and all the founders of the progressive movement. And of course, we've talked about how the ideas of progressivism really started in the Confederacy with many of their administrative agencies and bureaucracies, mandating an automatic draft of the Confederacy and so forth. We talk all the time about the similarities between the Confederate States of America and the Progressive Party of today. And I know you're very familiar with that history as well.
One of the actual, when 1690 Project came out, there was, I don't remember whether it was actually in that paper, in the magazine section at that time, or there is a book on it. I think it's called Accounting for Slavery. And it's a fascinating book, a fascinating work. They say that many of the documents that modern accounting relied upon were also very useful to keeping track of plantation labor and such like that. They would have very specific records for each individual slave as to what he or she was capable of. And it was a problem for the individual slave, because once you proved you could do X, they expected you to live up to that. And if you didn't, there were consequences for it. And I like to think of that as from each according to his abilities. And of course, today, the overseers, we call those people progressives, would ensure fed and housed and clothed as they thought you needed. And so thinking the Marxism is just simply basically saying, you're all going to be overseen. You're all slaves of the state.
Exactly. It's amazing how those progressives in those days too, looked to science. Of course, Darwin came out with his biological evolutionary theory, saying that certain people had evolved to a greater advancement than others. And they were using that with the positive good school, the slave power, men like Alexander Stevens and James Hammond were all talking about the mudsills of society, and the fact that there was definitely designations between classes and the makeup of people and a superior people. And they all look to science to substantiate it. No difference in the progressives of today.
Well, no, it was not just the Confederacy. There's a great book, which the late Judge Barnes sent me at one point, because when he and I served in the legislature together. It's called The Metaphysical Club. It talked about the James brothers, the Holmes family, the rest of the crowd from the Massachusetts area from like 1850 on to like maybe 1880 or 19, and the different philosophies they had about how to explain apparent differences in race and such on. And it's theories they came up with were and remember, these are hugely smart New England, more or less progressive individuals, very bright people, came up with these racial essentialist views where they actually posited that there must have been at least two creation events because it was so obvious that blacks and whites could not have been created equal, that God didn't do it that way. So there had to be some other explanation. It's crazy stuff. And
Yeah, interesting.
technology movement that came out, such like I trying to explain I don't know how far that goes with what we're talking about. But I mean, the idea was that any sort of movement, any sort of quote quasi-scientist attempt to use racial essentialism as a scientific basis drawing distinctions between people is nonsense. And you think one of the first things that science would have done is look at all that stuff and said, this is just complete and utter bovine excrement. And a problem with is I find you mentioned Alexander Stephens, an out and out person who believed, I guess you call him a white supremacist or a racist who believes passionately in
a real one.
Race. But the real kicker isn't he believed that whites were superior. The kicker was that he believed that race mattered. And you can a Confederate track or a track in favor of slavery or any one of those metaphysical society people and take their tracks, change a few words around it, and the exact same language can be used by today's progressives to claim the essential nature of racial characteristics or ethnic characteristics.
Mm-hmm. And Assemblyman, I wanted to discuss with you briefly another very, very divisive issue in the country now. We see that a large part of the electorate is very, very, they're not satisfied, or they don't have any confidence in our electoral process anymore. We talk about voter fraud and all the different discrepancies that may occur. And this really is a very, very, I believe, is a serious situation when the people don't have confidence in their electoral process. But don't you think that's essential that, for one thing, that we implement a universal identification card, just like we do with driver's licenses and voter identification as a beginning, and to turn the tide around the Democrats who think that that's a discriminatory policy? Isn't that something that Republicans should be standing up for in, again, reestablishing the confidence in our elective process?
Well, it's actually kind of funny because you've probably been around maybe almost as long as I have in terms of the knowledge. I remember back in the 70s, the conservatives were just dead set against the idea of a national ID card. It was just anathema. And that kicked into the piece where we just don't want to do that. And, we've had sort of an epiphany. Our philosophy is to say, you can't put that horse back in the barn. Something like that. The real, again, the big lie that the Democrats like to say is widespread voter fraud. Of course, they never explain why. That's their weasel word. But the big lie about electoral politics is that there's such a thing as voter suppression. It does not exist. Yeah. The Democrats never produced an actual, honest to God, living, breathing American citizen who was precluded from voting because registration and voting is simply too hard. Those people do not exist. Come back to the ideas, though, but with respect to vote by mail and such along those lines. My personal thought is that any reason, I put that word reasonable effort, to prevent voter fraud should be applied. Therefore, to my way of thinking, default setting should be, in the absence of a good excuse, you present your body to the people on election day, in person, at the polls, with ID, and you vote using a paper or physical media. That should be the default setting. If there are circumstances like service in the military or being away at school or disabled where such you can't do that, then they should allow you to V by M. Right. But I'm a little bit, again, remember one of the things the Democrats are all over is what they call ballot harvesting, which was so fraught with fraud that even the New Jersey Democrats effectively banned it. And if you've got something that terrifies New Jersey Democrats about voter fraud, and that's what you're advocating for, that's a problem. And so, again, is there widespread voter fraud? Again, it depends on how you define widespread. We saw it certainly in Patterson. We saw it in Hoboken. We've seen it in Newark. We saw it in Atlantic City. We saw it in Miami. There's entire sites that talk about the kind of widespread fraud that Republicans object to. And was it enough to turn in a presidential election? I haven't seen the evidence. Maybe, but I haven't seen it. But it sure as hell might have been sufficient to turn a congressional election or two. You had Iowa too, with 6 votes, and take too much, quote, fraud, unquote, to produce 6 or 7 votes. And in Patterson, they had 1,000. And my guess is that in Patterson, the people were, if you're going to vote in that kind of election, you're not restricting your fraud to the local elections. I again, admittedly, it's actually one of the ironies is that in New Jersey, most of the electoral fraud is one faction of Democrats trying to shaft another faction of Democrats. But I'm is that in November they're all big happy to campers together, and they're more than willing to shaft Republicans. So to ensure that the process is clear and transparent, and no fraud that can be prevented is not prevented. Again, we should adopt reasonable proposals. And we're going to go, for example, we're going to go through 9 days of early voting now. Why? What happened? This is actually one of my favorite stories. I know you saw it probably a couple of years ago, 2017, where like 3 days before a special congressional election, the Republican candidate for Congress body slammed a reporter. Now, already like 2/3 of the votes had already passed. And now my thought of the matter is that probably that would have gotten votes amongst the Republicans. But if you were going to make that as to be one of your fundamental issues, you see, I don't like that guy. How do you get your vote back? And it's not hypothetical. Because last year in the presidential ballots, hundreds of thousands of Democrats were disenfranchised when the candidate they supported dropped out before the actual election day, rendering their votes null and void. So early voting is a problem. It's costly. If somebody dies after this, and you have a close election, we had an election in my town ended in a tie after a recount and lawsuit. One person after they were dead changed the votes that result of that election. So one election day, in person should be the default setting, and the only exception should be when it's absolutely necessary.
I agree 100%. Well, and one other issue too. One other issue that's very important and is endearing to the hearts of all constitutional Republicans, of course, is the issue of abortion. And I wanted to ask you, shouldn't Republicans be resolute in expecting the court, the United States Supreme Court, to finally recognize the inviolability of a human being from conception, and reversing Roe v. Wade, giving the constitutional right of life to the child from the moment of conception, and then allowing the states to once again vote on legislation on any extraneous circumstances that may arise from that would constitute the forfeiture of that human being's constitutional right. I mean, wouldn't that be the expectation that we should want the court to finally observe the constitutional rights of a human being from the moment of conception? We clearly have science on our side showing this. We had the Texas heartbeat bill recently passed. It's been attacked. But don't you think that that's the directions that Republicans should be supporting, a court recognizing the inviolability of the child from conception?
Well, I've never quite understood why this is a left-right issue. I mean, the idea that somehow a human being's existence itself or his humanity is up for debate is a nonsensical statement. It's you either are or you are not. And once you are entitled to the respect due to all human beings. And again, so I just don't get it. I mean, and I listen to the other side on this issue, and they never finish the sentence. The right to choose. Well, to choose to do what? There's no object to that sentence. And again, I've always been puzzled why that is. But there's two questions that have to be asked. First of all, you got to admit that Roe versus Wade was wrong from the start. Not that it was a mistake on the Constitution. It was a willful abuse of judicial power. That nothing in the Constitution which even remotely requires that the states or the country allow abortion. Nothing. It was just invented out of whole cloth. And you, as a lawyer, it's an insulting opinion to read. And you go back and you look at it, it says, well, we may not be able to tell you where it comes from or what it means, but we know it's broad enough to include the right to kill a child. And that's just nonsense. The second question is a more interesting one. Getting the court to say that Roe was wrong does not mean necessarily that children are protected. And that's a much more interesting question is that have we as a people, when we adopted the 14th Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, already endowed the child with a right to life? That's an interesting question because generally speaking, as you know, constitutional violations must be done by the state. And if the state simply sits back and does nothing, generally speaking, that doesn't violate the law. So the analysis would be that you have to treat a child the same way you would treat every other human being, and therefore, under the Equal Protection Clause, protect him or her in exactly the same way as you would protect you or me. That's an interesting question. I don't know. I'm sure it's been framed that way. I must confess that over the 50 years since we've been screwing around with Roe versus Wade, my motivation has been more to get the court out of that business and to repair the damages it did. And then we will see later on how to deal with affirmative protection once we've gotten away from the idea that it's somehow an affirmative constitutional right to hire an assassin to off your child.
Mhm. Great. And as we wind down, Assemblyman, I'd like to ask you what's your prediction on the November 2nd election? Do you think that we can elect a Republican governor and make some headway for Republicans in the state house?
Ken, again, you're the Democrats. There's a guy who a number of years ago when Obamacare was coming forward, a guy named what a company. But anyway, he was Gruber, John Gruber. He said the Democrats on the stupidity of the American voter for their success, and all too often they're not disappointed. So, when Republicans are out there, as I said, saying do these things that are good for you, you eat your spinach, we are going to protect you and make you free. And against that, we're saying we will give you thousands of dollars of other people's money, and don't worry about the consequences. It doesn't bother you. You'd be stupid to vote the second way, but unfortunately, we see a lot of people who are. And so, you got Jack Ciattarelli is a very personable, very competent, very capable man. I've known him for a number of years. He'd be an excellent governor. As long as the governor isn't going to be me, he'd probably be as good a choice as any. And so, do we have a chance? This is a very tough state. You have you mentioned a minute ago about the college indoctrinated crowd from Montclair, who actually all this stuff. And when you've got a large number of people who've been brainwashed, as it were, or actually passionately believe that government exists to take from you to give to somebody else, or that government exists to equalize racial outcomes or gender or sexual outcomes or what have you, it's a problem to get by that. And it's always a problem to take away something or to win a vote from somebody who's depending upon the government for his or her next. So
that's been the predicament we've had for a long. That's been the predicament we've had for a long time, Assemblyman in New Jersey. But I want to share with the audience your Facebook page, and here's an example of all of the articles that you'll post, whether it's from the Wall Street Journal or National Review or New York Post.
Or New York Times or the Atlantic. I mean,
New York Times. Yes, you're very fair. You're very fair with all of your posting. But what's informative to the audience is your comments prior to the posting of the article. And here's one. Of course, you make a great statement about Murphy escalating the ideas of gun violence again, and you're asking this simple question. So after a criminal uses a gun in a crime, the state will look to see where the gun comes from, as opposed to the actual breaking of the law, and in many cases, the murder of a human being. We're so focused on the guns that we lose track of the criminal and the necessity of justice, real justice. What's the retributive process involved with bringing justice to a criminal? It's as if, Assemblyman, that we believe that the criminal is a victim rather than an actual criminal. And this has overtaken the thoughts of far too many progressive minds.
Well, it's actually true. And, you see people in blue cities electing people to prosecutorial offices and on express pledges not to prosecute. And then they wonder, hey, we're not prosecuting shoplifters. Why is there so much shoplifting? We're not prosecuting. We're letting people get out of jail free right after committing violent acts. Why are there so many violent acts? Why are shootings going through the roof? As I said in that one particular post, Murphy has claimed he's got all these great laws on the books, and yet shootings are going up. So if they worked, shootings would be going down. Anyway, I want to ask anybody who's out there listening to this to follow the Facebook page. Feel free to comment when you have the opportunity.
Mhm.
But I had a whole bunch of followers on it for a while, but something about Facebook, they tapped out all my followers. So if you want to follow again, please do so.
Absolutely. And that's why we put your page up, Assemblyman, because we share many of your posts, and we always regard your opinions very, very highly. There's no question you represent everything a constitutional Republican personifies, and being knowledgeable of the Constitution, which you employed all your days of representation in Trenton, and also being able to intellectually articulate properly what those ideas and values are, and a lover of philosophy. You know, I read an interesting article in the other day in the Claremont Review, where they talking about the difference between ideology and philosophy. Of course, philosophy is the very meaning of the word, means a love of wisdom, and then ideology is much more strict. It's much more direct, almost incapable of any kind of change or any kind of positive evolution. So I thought that was and you are definitely an articulator of philosophy, and that's one of the reasons we have so much respect for you.
Can't add to that.
Now, before we go, I have to ask you a question. What are your early thoughts this preseason on your New York Rangers? What do we expect from the King is retired. So now give me your insight on and it's amazing that he didn't win a cup, and neither did Eddie Giacomin. And Eddie Giacomin, I thought, was an outstanding goalie. Of course, I'm dating myself, but I was rooting for the Islanders in those days. So don't get too upset with me. But what are your early predictions on the Rangers this year?
My early prediction on the Rangers is the same every year. I look forward to being disappointed. You know, it's and that because if you're looking forward to being disappointed, you're almost never disappointed. And they have, I mean, back in the days when Giacomin was around, they had two real legitimate shots at a cup in 69 and 71, I want to say. And 1 year Pertel got hurt, Park got hurt. You know, they had legitimate shot at the cup a couple of years ago, and you know, the Kings pulled it out of their rears, and of course not without a little help from the officials. And I mean, my son is still bitter to this day about the number of blown calls and the fact that every single one of those blown calls went against the Rangers. And so, you know, it's anyway, you know, my thought is, if I had to, they got a good core squad, you know, but I think what'll determine how they do is the first couple of meetings or so against the Islanders, because the Islanders are a damn good team and have
they are
last year. And if the Rangers can stand up, play with them and beat them, then it might be a good year. Otherwise, my guess is that and somebody has to explain to me why they traded away Buchnevich for a gross of pucks and a Zamboni. But.
Yeah. Well, you know, Assemblyman, I'm a big fan of Lou Lamoriello. I consider the ninth wonder of the world now. I mean, he's over 80 and he's still doing a great job. And boy, the ownership of the Devils really blew it when they let Lou go. But he just continues to work his magic.
See,
go ahead.
Because I'm an old style hockey fan in the sense of that is that I don't hate the Devils or the Islanders or even the Flyers anymore. I know it's, you know, I root for the Rangers, but if the Rangers aren't winning, I'm more than happy to root for the Devils.
Yeah. Well, as we wind down, I just want to say one more thing that I think you'll be interested in, Assemblyman. On November the 1st, I'll have the distinguished Dr. Robert P. George joining me for a virtual conversation. Of course, he's the creator of the James Madison program on American institutions and ideas at Princeton. And I would love to have you join him and I for a future virtual conversation to talk about natural law and some of those other what the derivatives would come from natural law, how important it is for people to understand what natural law is, the laws of nature and nature's God that we read of in the Declaration of Independence. But I'm sure I wanted to make sure to mention to you that he'll be joining me for a conversation. We're very honored to have him as well.
I respect my limits. My thought of the matter is I would be better served listening to such a discussion than participating in it.
Well, I disagree with that. I think you can hold your own, and all your ideas are very, very important. And we love the fact that you talk to us and you allow us to have these conversations with you. And we look forward to having more in the future. But I certainly appreciate your input and insights.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Thank you all. And let's remember what Lincoln said. He said, liberty to all. Thank you. Take care.